ratified by the states 100 years ago, we know that that gave some women the right to vote, but really didn't give particularly women of color the right to vote. They didn't win the right to vote until much later. And so we wanted to have a conversation today to be with you to really talk about the fact that we need to be centering women of color, particularly in the voting rights movement. Our panel today is called Unfinished Fights, Unsung Heroes, and we have an incredible group of women joining us today, and we're so excited to be here with all of you. So whether you're an experienced voter or a future voter, we want to make sure that you know understand the historic disenfranchisement that Black and Brown communities have gone through and are continuing to go through so that we can effectively combat voter suppression today. All of our partners on this call, including our broadcasting partners, Girls Inc. and When We All Vote, are fighting tirelessly day to day to make sure that everyone has access to the ballot box and that everyone is registering to vote and is making their voices heard. So we're really excited to have you with us today. We're so thrilled to be here with you on this historic day and really talking about the complicated history of the 19th Amendment on a day when there's so much celebration. We really need to make sure that we are rooting that in our history. So without further ado, I'm really excited to start our panel off today. But first, I want to introduce our incredible partner, Dr. Stephanie Hall. Dr. Hall is the president and CEO of Girls Inc., our producing partner here today, an organization that inspires all girls to be strong, smart, and bold through direct service and advocacy. Prior to joining Girls Inc., Dr. Hall was the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation. She's also been the head of school for the Beardsley School and held various leadership and management positions at both Mount Holyoke and Dartmouth colleges. And Dr. Hall holds a PhD from Harvard University and a BA from Wellesley College. Dr. Hall has been an incredible partner to the United States of Women and When We All Vote. Girls Inc. organizations around the country, Girls Inc. chapters, are working with their young women to make sure that everyone is able to vote this year. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Hall. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jordan. It's great to be your partners, and we love the work of United States of Women, and it's just wonderful to have this opportunity. As Jordan said, this year marks the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment and women's constitutional right to vote. And it's a great moment and an important opportunity to emphasize that full gender equity really requires racial justice and equity as well. While the women's suffrage movement benefited tremendously from the leadership of Black women, it did not advance their right to vote. In fact, it would take more than half a century for women of color to access the ballot with the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Often overlooked in the pages of history, women of color have played an instrumental role in advancing civic engagement, voting rights, and social movements. From abolitionists like Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman to activists like Mary Church Terrell, Nannie Helen Burroughs, Ida B. Wells, Black women have really bravely fought for the rights of women and men long before they were seen as equal citizens under the law or were able to vote themselves. Building a more equitable society means ensuring that all people, regardless of race, gender, and socioeconomic status, are able to participate in our political system. Many of our most heavily debated issues, the economy, jobs, healthcare, education, civil rights, they carry tremendous consequences for the people who are most vulnerable and have the least political power. Women, women of color experiencing discrimination, poverty, and violence, and of course, children. That's why Girls Inc. believes it's so important for girls, and especially girls of color, to be civically engaged as early as possible. Through our She Votes initiative, girls realize the power of their voices, they understand the impact of politics and policy decisions on their daily lives, and they're inspired to lead and to become future female leaders. Girls are innately powerful, and with the right opportunities and support, they can grow up to be leaders and change agents in the world. Young people are not waiting until tomorrow to lead, as we know, and we're glad. They're speaking out, they're taking action today. Obstacles to voting still persist for Black Americans and for communities of color. Photo ID requirements, early voting cutbacks, difficult absentee ballot procedures, inadequate funding for elections, all those things are keeping people from voting. The COVID-19 pandemic presents just one more barrier to ensuring fair, accessible, and safe elections this fall. Through the Gender Equity Voting Collaboration, the United States of Women and When We All Vote are doing an outstanding job of providing the tools and the resources and the training to ensure that all women from all communities and across all generations are registered and ready to cast their ballot. So our conversation today will explore the historic and current disenfranchisement of Black and Brown communities, the valuable role women of color have played as change agents throughout history, and how a new generation of young activists are continuing the fight for racial justice and gender equity. Here to introduce today's panel and to serve as moderator is Ashanti Golar, host of the Brown Girls Guide to Politics. Ashanti?
Thank you, Dr. Holt. Thank you, Jordan. I am so excited to be here today to lead this conversation. Hello, everyone. I'm Ashanti Golar. I'm the founder of the Brown Girls Guide to Politics, which is a platform to get more Black, Brown, and Indigenous women involved in politics and to lift up our stories. Our platform consists of a blog and a podcast that is on Wonder Media Network. Today, we're going to be talking about what you heard, the 19th Amendment, which technically gave women the right to vote, but we know that it left so many women out of this movement. We're going to be having an intergenerational discussion about what does it mean to commemorate 100 years and what should the next 100 years look like. I'm going to get right into it and introduce the phenomenal panel. So if they can come on screen, we have Latasha Brown, who is the co-founder of a Black Voters Matter Fund, Jamia Wilson, a movement builder and storyteller, Ashton Mayo Beavers, a college student who's with Girls Inc. And congratulations, Ashton, who just graduated from high school with a phenomenal GPA, just doing all the young Black girl magic, which we know is really Black girl work. So kudos to you, sis. And Quadiera Coles, who is an Ignite alumni ambassador, also one of my favorite youth organizations, just getting things done. Let's get into our first question. What brought each of you to the work that you do today? And why does voting and being civically engaged matter to you? I mentioned we're intergenerational of all ages, but I think each of us can say that there's women, people in each of our age group who don't think it's important. They don't think it's important to vote, to get civically engaged. That isn't gonna impact my life. I don't see any changes, but you knew it was important. You came to this work. So who wants to start with telling us about what brought them here? Hey, Latasha.
Hi. So I will say what brought me this here is I wanted power. I mean, the bottom line is, even as a child, my grandmother, there's a running joke in my family that I always wanted to know who was in charge. And so we could go to McDonald's, we would go to Kmart, we go to the shopping center. Literally the first question when I would go in the room, I would ask my grandmother, I'm like, who's in charge? Who's the boss? And they would always like, what do you mean? And then it got from that to, well, who owns it? And so there's a running joke in my family around, I would always want to know who owned Kmart, right? And I realized that at the point, the reason why I was asking, because I wanted to know who had the power to make decisions. I wanted to know, how did all of this happen? Who made the decisions? And so even as a little child, I always was obsessed with this idea of knowing where was power. And so in my own community, as I grew up, I would see women doing a lot of the work. I would go to the church and see the women do all of the work, all of the programs, but I would see the preacher and I'm like, he didn't do this. And I would see people thank the preacher for this wonderful program when I had seen Miss Sarah do all of the work for this anniversary, and the women in the kitchen and the women in the church. And even in my own household, my grandmother was traditional Black Southern Christian, and there was this whole idea of they would say, the man is the head of the household. And I would always be baffled because there is nothing that moved in my household that my grandmother did not agree. Like, the truth of the matter is, my grandmother literally ran my household, and she allowed my grandfather to participate in the process. My point is, part of all of that is, I think, the shaping of who I am and led me to this work, that even as I start getting engaged in politics, I can't say that it was just like my idea, my thought one day that I'm just gonna jump into this work. It didn't happen that way. You know, I got pulled in this work. I think the way that I see it is I got called into this work. And so I'm here because of the foundation of others before me, but fundamentally, I actually got called into this work. So I'm doing, this work feels like a part of my purpose and my calling.
Ashton, why don't you tell us? New college student, you did all the things in high school, you're about to do all the things in college. What made you want to get politically and civically engaged?
I think a lot of it has to do, I just love having my roots everywhere. I like not being so stationary and being rooted to one spot. I like being involved as much as possible. And so like throughout high school, I was involved things from entrepreneurship to STEM to public policy to law and everything, because I love talking, and I love talking with different types of people. I don't like being in a position where I'm comfortable and I'm just comfortable with knowing everything that's going to happen. I like surprises and knowing and facing those challenges. And I love talking to girls that are like-minded like me, and like Girls Inc. and Teen Advocacy Council and all my other groups that I love to talk to girls across the nation and in my community in circumstances that I haven't even been in, but I can widen my perspective through, has been why I like to do that. And talking to girls at my school who don't have the opportunities like I do, but have a voice and don't know how to use them, I think really empowered me it continues to empower me, because they don't know the opportunities that they have for their voice to be empowered, but they do have a voice, but they don't know what to do with it. So I think a lot of that is honing in on the different experiences I listen to, because I just love to listen to other people and their stories, and kind of emulating that through my voice and advocacy, so it's not a straight line. It's not just my story. So I think that's kind of what brought me to all the things I'm active in and how I base my civic engagement.
I love that. One of my favorite people is Megan, the Duchess of Sussex. And she says all the time, I hate when people say women need to like find their voice. Women have a voice. Some of us just need to know how to use it. And like you discover that at a young age. So Jamia, sis, what brought you to this work? The amazing communicator that you are. You tell stories so well. What made you want to focus it in this area?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with each of you today. It feels like medicine. I think, for me, I just recognize the power that we have in our voice. And I think I was taught at a young age to step into my power, no matter what situation I was in. That was a family value of being taught, hey, there will be situations in which you feel powerless, but there is always some power that you do have. There's always some innate sense of strength that you can draw from. And, I think a lot about what a lot of us young Black children have been taught, which is, if you can't walk, you can crawl. If, whatever it is that you will find it within yourself to figure out how to move forward from a place of strength and a position of strength. And that's not to say that we cannot be in our vulnerabilities and that we cannot be who we are in all of our layers. But for me, it was something that really resonated to say, okay, what do I have the power to do? There are these systems of oppression that exist, that are real, that are creating real obstacles and real blocks to people like me and myself being able to rise to our fullest potential, just like everyone else. And I need to be able to use what power I do have and what strengths I do have to be able to dismantle that, to transform that, and to shift that. And I think also just a real passion for history. I always loved learning history. I've always been a nerd, and just loving to kind of ask big questions and dig into why things are the way they are, and realizing that my foreparents really cared a lot about the vote. Finding out that my grandfather, who was born in 1911, spent a lot of his time registering voters for the NAACP at much dangerous risk throughout the deep South, and why he did that, and finding out from him that in doing that, even though he knew that he may not even live to see the results of that, and him having to endure indignities like taking literacy tests and all sorts of things just to have his right to have his voice heard, really led me to be passionate about voter suppression and passionate about ensuring that we could flex our vote as a point of voice, because I know the kind of hardship that my family endured because of it, because they showed me at an early age that the dry patch of grass that still exists in our homestead came from a cross being burned there, from the very work of my family just simply trying to exercise their rights. So I care deeply about this. And I think the other thing I just wanted to share is that I experienced in my first voting experience, voter suppression. And I think that experiencing that, I was living abroad during the 2000 elections. It was my first time I was able to vote. And I remember being on Italian TV during my study abroad and having people ask us what we thought about President Gore getting elected. Oh, wait, breaking news. It's actually not President Gore. Now it's Bush. And seeing all that go down and seeing the Congressional Black Caucus go in and say, something's wrong with these absentee votes. Something's not right. And seeing all of these people I looked up to not being listened to, undermined and sidelined with a miscarriage of justice around the vote, all of the culmination of that family history, but then myself experiencing it, the first time I got to cast my vote has made me also feel very passionate about writing things while I'm here. So I'm just really honored to be in the conversation, because I think I'll never get over the trauma of having my first vote being tainted. And I don't want that for the next generations to come.
So powerful. Quadira, tell us your story. What has you sitting here chatting with us today?
Thank you for having me on this panel. And like Jamia, when I digged deep into my ancestry, I found the first voter registration from one of my ancestors who went out and registered after Black men were, awarded the right to vote. But also I have an ancestor who ran for office and he was lynched because of that. And it's just like, I feel like that bodacious and rebellious nature is just in my spirit. But I really got into this work I'm in today because I've always been curious enough to interrogate the practices and the roles of systems and institutions around us. And as a Black queer woman, I have lived through and witnessed most of the experiences we talk about on larger platforms today. And it was those lived experiences, along with my desire to be a problem solver, that led me to go into policy and organizing work. And I always tell a story that I can remember back to third grade when I was learning the civil rights movement. And my mom, she was a huge history geek. So I was learning things at home on the weekends, like going to museums and going to the library and reading books. But then I was learning one thing in school, and I was always interrogating my teacher. And they're just like, why can't you just be quiet and learn and read? And throughout my entire life, I had the nickname troublemaker or trouble, even like in my workplaces, because like I never doubled down without a fight. And, I owe my radicalization and analysis to the teachings of great thought leaders of the civil rights movement. And what I took from them is that radical change is the sum of a formula that includes mutual care community work, organizing with your people, political education, and government engagement. And the best way to actively engage with our government and to have some influence over who make decisions in our communities is through voting. And to me, that is very powerful, just in knowing that elected officials are accountable to us. And when we push hard enough, they should and would act in our best interests.
So true. And that's a great lead into our next question. So we've said it before, the 19th Amendment really was not inclusive of all women. There's an infographic that I've posted on the BGG Instagram where it actually shows how Black women, Indigenous women, Latina women, AAPI women didn't get the right to vote until after 1965. And each time I've posted it, I've gotten messages from people on Instagram. The teams had people that will email the website saying, wait, we don't understand this graphic. This can't be true. To which we have to say, let us send you some links to the Civil Rights Act, to the Voting Rights Act. Google is also free. You didn't have to email us. You could have researched these things yourself. But how has the historical understanding of women's suffrage played into the continued disenfranchisement of women of color today? Latasha and I just finished a panel about an hour ago with Dr. Keisha Blaine, and part of it was talking about history and how so many people do not know the real history of the suffrage movement. Whoever would like, Latasha?
So I'll just jump in around, I think it's part of the reason why people don't know the history is not, part of it is we do have to look, but we've also been erased in history. That the whole framework of how Black women, our contribution, we've been marginalized and minimized in the process. That the truth of the matter is even the suffrage movement was a result of the abolitionist movement. That those who were fighting for the abolition of slavery, actually, that's where the discussion around suffrage happened, right? And so you saw people like Sojourner Truth, who was a woman who was actually one of our first suffragists, who actually led that kind of conversation. And we think that it started at Seneca Falls, and it didn't. That conversation predated that, right? I would even say that conversation predated that from the time that African women were bought in forced enslavement on the shores, that we have always fought for our liberation in some form of fashion, right? And so as we think about the suffrage movement, that even in 1913, when there was a women's suffrage march where Black women, I told her I'm not a Delta, but many of my sisters are. And so there were 22 brave, courageous women from Howard University who made up the founders of Delta Sigma Theta that were a part of the movement. There were actually suffragists that had their banners, had represented themselves and walked in the march, and were asked to go to the back of the line, right? To the back of the line, because they didn't want the white women who were from the South to be offended, right? And so many of us don't know that story. A lot of people don't know that story. We don't know the story of, we can go forward in every single major transition, I think, that has happened, political transition that's happened in this country. Black women on some level have been on the vanguard of that. We can go from the civil rights movement, we can even go what is happening now. And so, I thought it was interesting just recently, a couple of days ago, where I was doing a media interview and someone asked me around, what did I feel about Kamala being the safe candidate? And I thought to myself, when did she become safe? Because she wasn't safe 2 weeks ago, right? She wasn't safe a month ago. Matter of fact, it was quite risky for there to even be a consideration of a Black woman, but that's how we get erased out of the history and our contributions, that at the point in which we're moving and we're shifting and transitioning, then all of a sudden it was there all along. That was the intention all along, when it hasn't been. That the truth of the matter is Black women in particular have always showed up. We've always pushed the boundaries. We showed up for our white counterparts, our white sisters, when they didn't show up for us. We've showed up for our men in spaces to fight for their rights when they didn't show up for us. So I'm saying on this 100-year anniversary that I do think I have a slightly different perspective around, should we celebrate the suffrage? I think we should. And let me tell you why. I believe that any time that we are advancing freedom for anybody, that it is some element of getting us closer to where we are. But we also have to acknowledge we're not there yet. So the fact that if any people that are oppressed, if there's some relief for them, that is a win for me, right? Whether you're a Latina sister, whether you're a white sister, whether you an Asian sister, that anytime that we're actually making some transition to open up freedom and liberation for one, it opens up and makes us a little closer for all of us. And so what we need is, we also need our counterparts. We need our white counterparts, white women and other counterparts, to really recognize that our liberation is also tied into their liberation, that ultimately there will be no democracy in this country until Black women have free and fair access to the ballot. There will be no democracy in this country as long as there are women who are subjected to different circumstances because of where they live or who they love or where they work. And so ultimately, we've got to really see this as a human movement, that Black women have been on the vanguards and we have been erased in history. But I will tell you, this is our moment. And what has made me excited, I'm looking at these sisters who I'm in this conversation with, these young sisters. I'm looking you at a dorm room. And Jamil, when you said 20 years ago, I was looking at you like, what? I thought you were a little baby, but the point of the matter is we're in a moment that I'm actually almost at the point of tears, that the level of young folks, the intergenerational, like interracial movement that I am seeing being led by Black women. Let me repeat, being led by Black women. We have been inclusive to all communities and fought for other communities when they failed to fight for us. So I think that this is a moment to be reflective around those who believe in freedom. We shall not rest until it comes. And so we're putting the olive branch out once again. We're gonna stand on the front lines of change and open up the space so that others will join us.
Powerful. Anyone want to add on to what Latasha said?
I'll add. You know, my understanding of the women's suffrage movement is that it excluded and isolated the voices and needs of Black women while exploiting our labor to push the agenda. The Black women were just as strategic, consistent, and devoted to the voting rights movement, yet we found ourselves marching alone. Black men needed our support in fighting racial discrimination and prejudice, while women wanted us to help change the inferior status of women in this country. Meanwhile, both groups were ignoring the unique challenges that Black women face, and afterwards refused to acknowledge the work that we put in to achieve the voting rights for all women. So like every movement, Black women have always been the backbone, yet our experience and needs are last to be heard. And ultimately, we are deprioritized in national discourse and national policy. We weren't even freely able and safely able to openly exercise our right to vote until the Voting Rights of 1965. So I think it's important that we honor and celebrate these unsung heroes by continuing to dismantle voter suppression and crediting Black women for doing the work today. But most importantly, ensuring that elected officials take on an agenda that centers Black women and girls. And if you would like to see what a Black girl agenda look like, I can drop in a comment box. It's a phenomenal organization, Girls for Gender Equity, and we have a national campaign that talk about key policy issues that directly impact the lives of Black women and Black girls. And I think it's something worth, these elected officials worth looking at, because, you know, we know the solutions best to our issues. So I'm gonna drop that in there.
Drop it, sis, drop it. Anyone else want to add on? Jamia?
Yes, so I just want to say I'm really thrilled to be a part of this conversation. I'm all about a Black girl agenda. And, you know, I think what I'm thinking about just hearing all of you and thinking about all the things we're talking about in history is, you know, what could have happened if people had listened to Black women when Black women had first said in their truth, in their knowing, because we're always on the front lines of, you know, being the first hit and affected with most of the social issues of our time. What would our country have looked like if we had listened to Fannie Lou Hamer, if we had really listened to Shirley Chisholm, if Shirley Chisholm had been given the broad support that she deserved? Where would we be if Ida B. Wells had been given more support and not asked to step at the back of the line? I think about that often. And, you know, I've been seeing a lot of tweets right now as we head up to the election about, oh, Black women will save us. And find that really problematic, because I think that the idea that people want to rest their laurels on Black women always having to kind of carry the water for everybody else, versus knowing that the reason why Black women have been leaders, why Black women have had vision and lead with visionary leadership that leaves no one behind, is because we are always on the front lines of dealing with how oppression impacts our communities and us first. We're always on the front lines of having to create solutions that will ensure that we will get the access that we need and that our communities will get the access that we need. And so as we enter this election season, the question I want to ask to people who are saying, oh, how can I be a better ally? How can I be a better co-conspirator? How can I show up? Is to say, what work are you doing to follow the leadership of Black women and to truly follow it, to listen to Black women, versus having this conversation of, oh, Black women save us, clean up, do it for us, as if that's what we're here to do, we need to reframe the conversation to be to a place of saying, you know, how will I follow the leadership of Black women and girls? How will I follow the leadership of Black women and their vision? And how will I do the work to support that vision? And I think that we really need to disrupt narratives around us having to be seen and cast as saviors, because it's still a subordinate positioning if we really think about it. And so that's something that's just coming up for me, that I hear all of your amazing leadership on this call. And what I'm wanting is for people to follow you, for people to really, really be earnest and in their actions and their deeds to say, I will follow and trust this leadership, not get in the way of it, undermine it, or sideline it. And I want to pledge to follow your leadership today. And I think, you know, following each other's leadership is so important, but to really ask that of the people who are saying that they are hearing us and listening to us and expecting us to save the day, to say, oh, here's how I should have listened in the past, and here's how I'm going to listen now. And I think that it is also incumbent upon us as we think about conversations around the election now too, to correct that in folks who were talking about their expectations for Black women voters, for example, as we head up into November, to say, yes, what is it that you're gonna do right now to follow our leadership? What is it that you're going to do to thank Black women for our leadership and make it easier for us to do what we need to do for our communities? Because we are not doing it for anyone else. We are doing it for our own liberation, and so that our communities can thrive and everyone else benefits. And I think that that is something that also really needs to be interrogated and needs to be discussed and honored as well, that real shift in how we see our role and our purpose in political leadership. And the last thing I'll say is I've had a lot of people encourage me to run for office since 2016. And I see this with other Black women I know who have, you know, had the privilege and access to an increased platform than we would have had prior to the Women's March and all of the things we've seen. And what I want to say to folks is, you know, I think it's honorable and something that I value that people would see leadership in me and other people. But I want to say, when I look at the pay gap numbers, when I look at what it costs to run for office, and when I look at what it takes for women of color to get that support from political parties and that financial support from contributors, I see a lot of disparity and a lot that makes me feel wary about that being a potential.
Oh, Jamia, I just lost sound for you. Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
We can't hear you, but I hear you, Jamia. I'm just gonna jump in real quick and say, sister, you just need to run. Run, sister, run.
Yeah.
That women like
Yeah.
run. I hear what you're saying, right? But oftentimes we've never been in a position to have the most money. I get your point, but I'm just gonna say spirit just stopped you right now. The spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer to say, we want you to run, sister. Run, sister, run. We got your back.
I echo.
I do think I think you're right. There's not enough resources and development, but also a lot of times women are waiting for people to give us permission, right? We're waiting for people when the world needs our leadership. I just want us to recognize what time this is. The world needs our leadership. This isn't just about following Black women because you follow Black women. We have never fought for anything that did not make it better for everybody, including white women. When you think about affirmative action, white women have benefited from affirmative action more than we have. There's never been anything that we stood and we fought for that that everybody else did not benefit from it. So I'm just gonna say, and I'll put myself back on mute, Jamia, run, sister, run.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Oh, great. So that's so funny. I still don't know what happened, but maybe you're right, it's spirit. So I want to say, I think it is important for us to run, and I want to see more of our faces in the halls of power than ever before. And I also feel that for people to expect us to rise into our power, we need to be given the resources that we need to succeed, because that glass cliff is real sharp. And we are so often put onto that cliff and not given the resources that we need to thrive and survive. And so I'm with you though, and I'm hearing you, and you need to also
Yes, and I think we can have an entire conversation just about the need for Black women's leadership in elected office. I can drop some stats real quick. 25 Black women in Congress, 5 Black women elected to statewide executive office, only 340 Black women in state legislative positions. And we only have 7 Black women who are mayors of some of the largest cities. Just that right there. But I think it's also a conversation. It's something I've been talking a lot about too, is we can equate the fact that Black, Brown, and Indigenous women were not fully included in the 19th Amendment and how that has a complete through line to the numbers that we see today. I'm very honest with people that it has not been 100 years for everyone. And you can see that when you look at the numbers of Black, Brown, and Indigenous women who are in elected office. And I want to take us to our next question. Have so many things I want to ask all of you, and we're already running out of time. It's such a robust conversation, but we've talked about the voting rights movement. And you kind of think of 2 main things. You think of the suffrage movement, where we've talked about there wasn't full inclusion. And we think about the 60s and the civil rights movement, again, where we know Black women, again, were leading, but you don't see our full representation. You really see like the supportive wife who was there with her husband who was getting things done. But we know behind the scenes what was really going on. We knew how Black women were running things. So when we think about the modern voting rights movement, what are some of the things that have evolved? And what are some of the things that haven't, that we really need to continue to work on?
I can speak on, oh,
Sorry.
you can go ahead.
We'll do Kadira, then we'll do Ashton.
I think our advantage today is that we can reach more people. There are a variety of ways to meet people where they're at, and so many opportunities to educate folks. Also, our movement today has become so much more diverse. And again, I think we owe that to the accessibility of political education beyond school curriculums and our traditional spaces that may present things from one perspective. So we have a new generation of thought leaders who are starting off much younger and are so passionate and determined to change minds and hearts. But unfortunately, what has stayed the same is the fact that we still have to fight for our right to vote and safely vote. So I think that's something that needs to be like a permanent change. Like, it's sad that, 100 years later, Black women are still fighting to have safe access to the voting polls, especially given this whole COVID pandemic.
And just to add on to that, voting is this systematic machine that in our society, we've grown up since our history classes learning about the suffrage movement and voting rights, and then saying, wait till you're 18, that's when you're going to have a voice, that's when you're going to finally have the right to vote. But we don't recognize and acknowledge that Black women and Black girls have been always told, wait till you get your turn, wait till you get your voice. And that's been ingrained us for so long that voting is just a routine. It's just a routine that we're comfortable with. We don't go beyond researching, oh, why am I doing this? Questioning why this is happening, why it's structured the way it is, and why these people in power are getting away with things that they are. We just do it because it's part of our civic duties and don't question whether or not things are in place. And right now we have access to technology. A lot of the younger demographic, we have access to such new technological innovations where we can research and we don't have excuses to ask why and not know the answer. We have technology where we can do research, and even during this pandemic, we have access to have these discussions like we're having now in virtual things. We don't have excuses to have face-to-face contact, to not be informed, to not be civically engaged, to not have civil disobedience, because we can't just stand here and not be uneducated and not vote and not know what's going on around us. We have the access to technology and things like that. And even if somebody doesn't, we know somebody who does, and they have those resources. So really using technology to our advantage, not to spread and push our ideals, but to spread resources and our voices is really what I'm seeing also through our newer generation as well. Like Kadera said, like we have these technologies and these resources and we just have to use them.
You know, three quick things that I want to acknowledge that I think that is different. One is just kind of like here in the work that you were doing, Ashanti, that what we're seeing is we're seeing women do institution building. That what is really different is that instead of us just working within the institutions, which we do that as well, we're also taking leadership and creating institutions that are specifically related to the empowerment and leadership development of Black women and Black girls. And so you see like GGE and organizations like Black Women's Roundtable, and an organization that I founded that I was a visionary for, and literally am a co-anchor, which is the Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium, that we are creating institutions. So because we know that we've got to do capacity building. It's one thing to do mobilization, but there's another thing to do organization. Even when we're thinking about the largest uprising in this country was related to Black Lives Matter. That movement was created by three Black queer women, that we are really shifting the paradigm of what leadership looks like, not just in this country, but around the world. So I think that's also, and then I gotta add that the fact that we've got a Black woman as vice president nominee on the ticket, you know, it doesn't, wherever you land in that, you have to acknowledge that that is a historic moment that breaks the ceiling. And when we break the ceiling, it does enter more light and more opportunity for the rest of us. And so the crack will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think that there are ways now that we're really standing and owning our power that's really shaping the future and shaping policy in this country and in the world.
I love you talking about the power of the institution as it relates to that, because although I know all institutions are complicated, when I was so excited about Kamala, I had some people ask me, you seem really excited. What is this about? And I'm saying, one, that although we know that systems are very important in terms of real change, representation also does hold a lot of power. And as someone who studied at Howard and is an Alpha Kappa Alpha soror, I am very, very proud to see not only Kamala Harris, seeing Kamala Harris come forth and bring conversations about our community up and the power of our community and our coalitions to the fore, but also know that she's also going to have a strong coalition of people behind her that some people might not have known about and might have discounted as a really powerful, long legacy of connection and community. And so I found myself thinking, wow, it's not only a moment for me as a Black woman, but it's also a moment for me who's been a part of these different institutions, and seeing them also being connected, and other people who will see themselves and see elements of their path represented and reflected in her ascension to power, and the people who will benefit from this. One other thing I just want to say about institutions while we're talking about this is just that I've been thinking a lot about the census and how I want to see more conversation about how the threats to the census that are happening under this administration will leave out people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color specifically, and also people like a lot of my family members who are living in the rural South. And so I'm thinking about that a lot right now, and have that top of mind around how we make sure that we are counted, and making sure that we get the resources that our people need to be counted out there, but also that our people can be safely counted. And wanted to name that as well as a point of political power that we all need to flex right now. And if we have not yet been counted, it's time for us to go online and count, or if we know people in our lives who are having trouble getting counted right now, that we can help them get counted. Because it's extremely important. And I want to see us not just think about this particular election, but think about how this census that we're working on right now will affect districts in the future for our people to be counted as well.
All right, our last question. I hate that this conversation has to end So I'm going to try to combine some questions. Jamia, you mentioned the census, which is so important, but we also have to realize that we are going into another election season without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act.
Mhm.
And we know that strongly impacts our young people, our Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, our seniors, our people in rural areas. There is so much at stake, and we see people wanting to limit our votes. So I want to start with our young sisters, Ashton and Kadira, to the young women who are watching you, who are listening to you. What advice do you have for them about making sure they're politically and civically engaged, not just them, but their entire crew? And for Latasha and Jamia, what should be our main takeaways that we are telling our people during this time? Ashin or Kadira, you want to go first?
I'll go. I just want to say I see so many young women stepping into their power, finding their political voices in such a male-dominated industry and leading conversations. And like they have always done, but this new generation is shattering glass and steel ceilings in order to save our communities. However, there is an ongoing divide in beliefs these days due to like a lack of trust because of this pandemic and a lot of the uprising. So people are beginning to see less value in their vote and believe that defying the electoral process is the best way to force elected officials to act in their best interest. I know a lot of people are saying that they feel like they're being treated like puppets to advance someone who isn't representative of their communities into power. So barriers I do see young women facing is having to navigate these hard conversations, and it is taking up a lot of energy and a lot of time. But I do feel like that we are on the right track. You know, we are doing what we need to do, and a lot of good things have come out of what we have been doing so far. So it is our responsibility as people occupying these spaces to continue to drive these conversations, continue to hit the streets, continue to educate one another, and continue to learn and evolve. We should be mindful of different opinions and find common ground instead of shaming people, because that further isolates people from the polls, and we don't want that. We want people to go out and vote. Secondly, I think it's just so important and a huge barrier, the restrictive state guidelines and the forever changing ways we have to vote. So just checking in with your registration status is extremely important, but also checking in with your state guidelines because it varies across the state and sometimes it varies across counties. There's so many ways to get involved, even if you don't want to vote. Like there are polls that are closing down. And I think it's important for young people to, polls are usually worked by older people. So I think it's time for us to step in and take in and volunteer at these polls. Some counties, they pay for you to take that opportunity to become election inspectors to make sure that everything is the way it is, but also organizations are creating tools to make it easier for younger people to register to vote and understand their state guidelines. Like Ignite National, we have a tool called Sophia, the voting bot. And what it does, it simplifies voting for Gen Zers. And it also makes it easier for you to check your county's voting guidelines. And it is important for us also to be accountability buddy to our peers to make sure that we all fulfill our civic duty and go out and vote. This is a collective movement. This is not it individually. This is not an individual role. This is something that we all have to tackle together. And I'll drop the tool in the chat box as well.
And just to add on, young women are facing the also barrier of being the token Black girl in their advocacy group and being typecasted to only one advocacy problem. So as much as they want to get civically engaged in as many advocacy groups as they join, they get stuck to one problem only. As a woman, they get stuck to the gender pay gap to only advocate for. And as a woman of color, they get stuck to just diversity, but girls have such a large platform of things that they're passionate to speak for about the economic system and the environment that they want to speak on, but society and the advocacy constructs of what they're placed in as just a woman of color fits them only to one box. And so I just think that young girls, they're ready and they're curious and they're listening for their opportunity to have that voice, especially in our generation. They're really using social media to find their opportunities to use their voice, but people need to realize that they're not only the advocate for these issues that their skin color and their gender defines them as. And even so, like, sorry, I'm losing my voice, but we shouldn't allow ourselves to typecast that as well. We're told that, oh, you have such experiences on this and this, but we have experience on so many other things as well. And we just also need to create experiences and spaces where we can facilitate discussion and not feel comfortable in what we know, because once we're comfortable, we are complicit in things that happen around us, and getting uncomfortable in discussions where we are around voices that are not like our own and ideas that are not like our own, because that's when we have perspectives that are different. And that's when I think I found my voices when I wasn't comfortable, around the voices I had, because I was really able to find discussion and to find opposition and to find ways that my voice is only typecast in one way. And I found that I can have a multifaceted voice and multifaceted views. And that's what young women need to know, is they are not just one person, one advocate. They represent so much more. And I think it was Representative Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts said, the ones closest to the power, the one closest to the pain should be ones in power. And we are, as young women of color, the closest to the pain. So therefore we have the capacity and we have the ability to be the ones in the power, and we just need those opportunities. So even adults, give those opportunities to the young women to have these safe spaces to facilitate discussion. It's not just on the young women to work their way up. We have to be met halfway with the people who are occupying these spaces to make spaces for the new generation coming in.
So well said. And we're going to have to end there because we're at time. I'm sorry, Jamia and Latasha, but I think Ashton closed this out so beautifully. I want to thank each of you for your time today, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Hall.
Thank you, Ashanti. Thank you, panelists. I think this was a great conversation, a really powerful conversation about where we've been and the road that's ahead of us. When all women vote, girls and women have the best chance at growing up in a more equitable and just society. I just want to tell you a quick story. Many of you may know it, but some of you may not. It's about a moment when a girl changed the world, and we seem to have forgotten. In 1955, which was a full decade before the Voting Rights Act, Claudette Colvin, who was 15 years old, was heading home from high school on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She'd been learning in school about Black history, and so a white person boarded the bus and wanted her seat, and she just refused to stand up. She later told the reporter who covered the story, and this is a quote, "It felt like Sojourner Truth was on one side, pushing me down, and Harriet Tubman was on the other side of me, pushing me down. I couldn't get up." That's the end of the quote. So instead, Claudette went to jail. And that was 9 months before Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat, and she started the bus boycott that we are all more familiar with. 9 months. So movement leadership really decided that they needed a figurehead who wasn't a teenage girl, maybe an adult, maybe better skin, better hair, and more important, an adult who wasn't about to become a single mother, as Claudette was at that moment. But we need to remember that it was a girl who led the way. And it's time to remember that girls have often led the way. So yes, we've said today, listen to women, listen to Black women in particular, but listen to girls too, because we need girls who care to become women who vote. And the future that our vote will create is a future where girls have the freedom to create and to play and to imagine and to not worry about their safety and security. It's a future where girls have the time and the space to be curious and to learn and to uncover new worlds and possibilities through education. It's a future where all girls have access to caring adults and role models and mentors who expand their ideas of what they can become and provide opportunities and pathways for success, as Ashton said. And most important, it's a future where all girls and then all people are free to be themselves, to resist stereotypes, and to have the power and the ability to lead. So we have a responsibility here to pass along to our young people that's a world that's in better shape than the one that we have right now. And we need to do everything we can to expand voting and expand civic engagement. Your vote is your voice. So let's all make our voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hall, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. It was such an incredible conversation, powerful, powerful words. We learned so much today, and I hope that all of you, the audience, took some lessons learned away from this conversation. We all know that the 19th Amendment did not grant all women the right to vote, but each and every one of you and our panelists and our incredible moderator, Ashanti, are working to make sure that that changes this coming election and beyond. So we're super, super excited that this was a part of our When All Women Vote Week of Action. And this week, we're going to continue to engage all of you in actions that you can take to uplift and amplify Black and Brown voices across the country who are doing this work every day. So if you haven't already, please take our pledge at bit.ly/allwomenvote, and that'll let you know how you can take action this week and beyond. And then also, please join us for our couch party in partnership with Glamour and When We All Vote. That's happening this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to text voters and make sure that they are ready and have a plan to vote this November. We're going to hear from some incredible special guests, including Samantha Berry, editor-in-chief of Glamour, and Valerie Jarrett, who is board chair of When We All Vote. So we're super excited. That's coming up in a couple of days. You can register at weall.vote/USOW party. That's weall.vote/USOW party. And we're super excited to have you all take action with us so we can see real change and continue to amplify the voices of Black and Brown women. So thank you again and have a great evening.